My name is GiBi, this is Toto, and welcome to the Horror Homestead. This is a video in an ongoing series I'm making about the Five Nights at Freddy's series of Fazbear Frights novels. In each video I'm going to analyze, summarize, and theorize about a different story in the Fazbear Frights series. I'm currently a believer in the Frights fiction fan theory, which states that all these stories are in-universe tales made up by Fazbear Entertainment to make light of or obfuscate their criminal past. We're now talking about the 7th physical book, The Clips, and its 3rd story, He Told Me Everything, also known as Fazgoo. The story is by Ellie Cooper, and it is one of the worst stories in the entire series. Chris is a little tool bag who's a high school freshman and doesn't appreciate his life. He is middle class and his dad works on car engines, and he doesn't think that that's sophisticated enough, so he's embarrassed by his parents' jobs. He's smart, so when he's older, he's gonna do all the correct things and live a good life, unlike the one his parents are giving him. The opening line of the story is, "I wish we were a nice family." He wants his dad to be a doctor and to play tennis, but instead he's just a mechanic. He has to help out the old lady next door who's a retired English teacher, and he thinks to himself that she only graduated from a small local college decades ago and then only taught high school English, so it's likely that she couldn't ever teach him anything, because he's probably smarter than her. She's not a highly educated person, she's just a low-level high school teacher. Chris has a dog named Porkchop, and he resents this because he wants a well-bred, smart, elegant dog, but they got a pound mutt instead. He has two good friends, Josh and Kyle, who he hopes to ditch as soon as they start high school tomorrow because he wants to befriend true intellectuals. Higher status friends. So it's the last day of summer, and the boys are gonna go to the dairy bar. Kyle yells, "I'll race you there." They took off. Chris intentionally didn't pedal as fast as Josh and Kyle. He figured he might as well let them win. There are many achievements in his future, so maybe he could let one of them win the race to have some small sense of accomplishment. Soon he would be leaving them in the dust in other ways. If Chris had grown up in a nicer neighborhood, he would have ended up with a better class of friends. There's a nice little metaphor allegory thing where there's this pond where they hang out, and Chris calls it stagnant, and then he thinks about how Josh and Kyle are like the pond. They're stagnant, but he is going somewhere in life. You would never go anywhere on me, right, Toto? I'll take that as a sure. Yeah, so this kid just has a really bad attitude. As far as I can tell, this has nothing to do with, the thing that he's gonna have to face in the story. It's not irony or anything like that, it's just that he's a little jerkhead. This isn't like Lonely Freddy, where he's the lonely, friendless boy, and then Lonely Freddy's a metaphor for how society leaves lonely people behind. This is just a story where this kid is mean and something bad happens to him. Yes, I am saying it now. This story is worse than Lonely Freddy. Chris is excited to start school tomorrow because he's gonna have a wacky, crazy scientist professor named Mr. Little as his teacher. He has some weird decorations in his room, and a wacky attitude. He talks about how cool science is, and how messy and dangerous it can be. Ooh. Mr. Little has a lock-in at the beginning of the year, so they stay overnight in the classroom, where the students can stay for some extra credit. They do an experiment all night long as a group. Chris is very excited to do this. He befriends some older students in his class, and they're all hyped for the lock-in. 25 pages into the story, and we're now jump-scared by the mention of a Freddy Fazbear name. Mr. Little tells them that for the lock-in, he's going to be giving them all a Freddy Fazbear Mad Scientist kit, and inside all of those will be something called Fazgoo. All they have to do is rip a tooth out of their head and put it into the goo. He tells them that if they don't want to do this, they just shouldn't come to the lock-in. Science requires sacrifice. He doesn't tell them what the experiment is for, but he does say that the results will speak for themselves. Literally. We don't know what this means yet, but we will. He says that there's going to be an experiment, and when the experiment's over, they're going to put it in a bio-waste bag, and then they can leave, which defeats the point of a lock-in, because a lock-in is that you can't leave, but, for safety reasons. So, what do you do when you're done? Do you, just go and hang out in the gym and, play hacky sack or something? Chris spends the entire next day worried about this, and it's now that I realize that the entire story is just and then my teeth fell out, nightmare. Some of the stories are about body horror, some of them are about, common fears. I wouldn't be surprised if there was a story that was just a spider thing. So this entire story is just, my teeth fell out. Boo, isn't that scary? I don't particularly find that scary, so there's nothing scary in this story for me. It's just stupid. That night, Chris's little sister has a loose tooth, so Chris gets an idea. He always saved his baby teeth, so he takes one of them to class so he doesn't have to pull one out of his head to do an experiment with. Chris goes out to lunch the next day with the slightly older smart friends, and they get coffee, and it's expensive, so he goes home, and he asks his mom for an up on his allowance, and she's like, "Your friend shouldn't care that you're poor." And then she's like, "Okay, wait, never mind, I get it." Chris is a snob because he's ditching his, Josh and Kyle friends for greener pastures, and he's all full of himself. He'll do anything to fit in and to move up in the world. That includes sacrificing a tooth for this experiment. But then he cheats in the experiment, so like he's not really ready to sacrifice things? So I guess it's saying that the best thing he can do is appear to fit in by appearing to sacrifice things. I guess. Then the night of the lock-in comes. They get Fazgoo, and they all sit in little cubicles in the classroom with a table and a cot. He gets a little, like, petri dish of Fazgoo, and he takes his little baby tooth and he puts it in, and then a strand of something sticks out of the goo and attaches to your finger. It's stuck on like a melting mozzarella cheese in a pizza commercial that's really made of glue. Mr. Little explains that the Fazgoo will draw some of your blood through this connection, and using your tooth as a base, it will grow gums and then a mouth. And the mouth will tell you something. Something you will never forget. And then it will die, and then you throw it away, and then you go home. That's the experiment. Everyone does this. Chris can't see anyone else's experiment because they're all in their little cubicles, which kind of defeats the purpose of it being an experiment they're all doing together. I don't know. It kind of seemed like all the other classes did like some like big project together, but now they're just doing individual projects. Okay. He takes a nap on his cot. He wakes up, and there's a weird pulsating blob of flesh in the dish that his tooth had previously been in. He hears one of his friends, Brooke, finishing her experiment. He hears her go to Mr. Little and tell him, "She told me everything," and then leave. So her mouth told her everything that she needed to hear. Chris falls asleep again. He has a dream that he lost all of his teeth. Mr. Little checks on him and implies that he's behind. This is probably because he used a baby tooth and not a fresh one. He hears more people starting to leave, and soon the whole class leaves. They all walk up and say, "He told me everything," or "She told me everything" to Mr. Little, and then they get to go home. When he awoke, he gasped at the sight on the table. The mass had more than quintupled in size, and was now far too large to fit into the biohazard bag. It was still slimy and pink, but it was no longer an inert blob. Shaped somewhat like a limbless human torso, it was now pulsing with life. Chris felt excited, but also a little fearful as he approached his creation. The way it expanded and contracted made him feel like something might jump out of it like a creature he saw in a horror movie once. He stood over the pulsing mass. Its skin, if you could call it that, was a translucent pink, like a bubble blown from bubble gum. Beneath it was the source of the pulsing, a cluster of bag-like structures that were beating to a rhythm that seemed strangely familiar, though Chris didn't know why. He looked at the tendril, now thicker and stronger, that connected him to the newly formed organism on the table. The tendril pulsed in unison with the strange thing's organs. Chris gasped when he realized why the pattern of this pulsing seemed so familiar. The thing's organs and the tendril that connected him to it were throbbing with the beat of Chris's own heart. A shudder ran through him, and he was overcome with a sudden need to empty his bladder. Just as Chris decided that he was desperate enough to call for Mr. Little and make the pathetic confession that he needed to use the restroom but didn't know how, the pressure in his bladder disappeared. He looked over at the thing on the table, which expelled a large amount of fluid that hit the floor with a splash. Was that his pee? And what was it doing over there? Chris knew he should have been embarrassed. He was pretty sure he just peed on the floor of his science classroom after all. A big no-no if there ever was one. But mostly he was just confused. Wasn't his pee supposed to come out of his body? He looked at the tendril, now even thicker and stronger. It was a tube connecting his body to the thing, feeding it like the umbilical cord that connected a mother with her unborn baby. Maybe his pee had traveled from him through the tube to be expelled by the thing on the table? But why? He watched the thing pulse some more. Whatever it was, he didn't like it. And he didn't like being connected to it. He didn't like knowing he was letting it leech his energy so it could grow bigger and stronger, while he grew more exhausted and weak. It was time to cut the cord. The problem was, he didn't have anything to cut it with. Scott, Mr. Cawthon, are you taking the piss out of us? What is this story? Chris tries to cut the tendril, but doing that makes him black out. So then he realizes, because, like, you know, it's like part of him now, like, the thing is, like, has his lungs and it's breathing, so if he tries to cut it, he's gonna black out, it's or whatever. He wakes up the next time and realizes that he's missing an eyeball. His eyeball socket is just empty. He sees something that might be his eyeball traveling down the tendril. So yes, this thing is, like, actually cloning him. Even without the benefit of having both eyes, Chris could see things clearly now. Wow, good job. He freaks out about never getting to see his family again, and he appreciates them now, because that was the lesson. Chris understood that he would never see his mom and dad and Emma again. He would never take another bike ride to the dairy bar and the lake with Josh and Kyle. Somebody else would have to take Pork Chop for his walks and feed him his dinner. Now he understands that the blob is going to become a new him. He was wearing Chris's clothes and looking at Chris with what had once been his left eye. Did that mean Chris was naked? He looked down at his reclining body and quickly saw that it didn't have enough structural integrity to support clothes. Chris's body was devoid of muscles and bone. He was a mass, a blob. He had no idea how he could still be alive, how he could still be aware with so little of him left. There was no way he could hold out much longer. The thing got down from the table and used Chris's bones and muscles to walk over to the cot. With his one remaining eye, Chris saw his creation. He saw that this creature looked so much like him that nobody would ever know the difference. It would go to Chris's house and take its place in Chris's family. It would sit at the dinner table with his mom and dad and Emma, eating hot dogs and macaroni and cheese. It would play with Pork Chop. It would study at Cool Beans Coffee and go to school and science club meetings. Chris saw that his own life was going to go on without him. So I guess all of this characterization in this story of Chris being a little dummy head was just for this next part, because Chris is so worried about his future that instead of fighting for himself, he sets up the clone to do it, perfectly. Because he doesn't get to live this, future he's planning out, he wants the clone to live the future that he's planning out. And, that's fine. We understand that Chris is someone who would care about that. He wants to set the clone up for success, but I don't understand why other kids who were being cloned like this would also care as much about their future. Why would they tell their clones stuff like, "My mom and dad, they're going to love you because they love me. Be nice to them." He stopped to try to catch his breath. Breathing used to be so easy, he never even thought about it. "Be nice to my sister, too. She's a good kid. A Girl Scout. She's your sister now." The words were hard to get out, but he had more he needed to say. "Mrs. Thomas, our neighbor, she's old. She's a nice lady. Help her when you can, and play with Pork Chop." The creature furrowed its brow, looking confused. "I am to play with a pork chop?" Chris felt the last of his strength fading. He whispered, "Pork Chop is my dog. Yours now." Chris felt the tendril that connected him to his life disintegrating. "Take care of him," he said, but his words came out so softly he was afraid that only he could hear them. Chris felt a strange sensation of suction where his right eye was, and then everything went black. He listened as his eyeball was sucked through the tube. There were more slurping sounds, too, as other parts of him were drawn up through the tendril, parts he knew he couldn't live without. It was like the creature was drinking him, sucking the last of his organs through a long straw, like the dregs of a milkshake, leaving only an empty vessel. I am now going to read the end of the story. Chris, as the creature would have to learn to call itself, stood over the shapeless mass of empty flesh on the cot. He opened the biohazard bag and stuffed the fleshy remains of the experiment inside of it. He was surprised that he was able to cram all of it into one bag, and when he picked it up, the contents were surprisingly light. It left the cubicle and found Mr. Little sitting at his desk, drinking from a styrofoam cup of coffee and munching on a donut. "Well, good morning, Chris," Mr. Little said, standing up and brushing crumbs from his mustache. "You had a long night, didn't you? But don't keep me in suspense. Did you finally complete the experiment? Did you get the results you wanted?" The new Chris's eyes were wide and full of wonder. Soon he would be stepping out of the classroom and out of the school and into the world for the first time. Chris handed the biohazard bag to Mr. Little. He looked into the teacher's eyes and smiled. "He told me everything," he said. As Chris walked outside the school building, the sun was warm on his face. The sky was blue. The clouds were white and fluffy. The birds chirped in the trees. Chris smiled. It was a beautiful day. Analysis, I guess. Chris was trying to replace everyone in his life with someone better. He wanted a better, nice family. He wanted, cooler, smarter friends. So he got replaced because irony? See, it makes sense that Fazbear would make a product that does that. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. Fazgoo... What is Mr. Little's plan? What is going on? What is the purpose of literally any of this? This story is abysmal. I hate Lonely Freddy because the writing is awful and the ending is obvious. This is bad for different reasons. Lonely Freddy's last page was actually the best thing about the story, and one of the best things about the series, actually. This story has no redeeming qualities. It's actually just stupid. And not just because Fazgoo is like a crazy lore drop. If this was a Goosebumps story, I would also think it's dumb. What is Mr. Little's plan? Why is he just replacing 15 to 20 students with Fazgoo versions of themselves? If they're good enough copies, why does the fact that there are copies at all matter? If they aren't good enough copies, aren't people going to start noticing that 20 kids disappear every year and are replaced with Fazgoo clones? What is the point of this entire experiment? Or maybe Chris messes it up by using a baby tooth. Maybe that's why he became a Fazgoo clone and the other kids didn't. They did it right. And Mr. Little doesn't even know that Chris messed it up. But I don't think so. There's nothing in the story that says that that's what the issue would be. I think if he had used his sister's tooth and it had gone wrong, then maybe we could be oh, the experiment messed up because it's a weird monstrosity. But then I also think the community would call this an incest story, and I don't think Scott wants that. The fact that every student walked up and said, "He told me everything," or "She told me everything," means that they're all clones. Means that Mr. Little wants this to happen. Means that Fazbear is selling these science kits where the purpose is to sell them to a mad scientist who then lets kids use them to clone themselves, and every person being cloned understands that, like, it's a good thing that their clone is coming alive, and so they tell them everything about their life to help them fit in, and then no one notices that the clone is a clone. Like, the premise of the story doesn't make any sense. It is so stupid. It parallels Lonely Freddy more than it parallels the games, and I don't think that that's a good thing. Like, I don't think that Mr. Little is, like, a William Stanton or something. Like, I don't think the story is literally saying anything. Frights fiction-wise, it just seems that it's making fun of the idea that Fazbear Entertainment would sell a defective product or a dangerous product. Maybe it's like, if your Fazbear product is dangerous, it's because it's defective. I never want to think about this entire story again. It's complete bottom tier. We had a scene where a kid had to pee, and so his pee travels through his finger through a Fazgoo umbilical cord to a blobfish on the other side of the room, and then it pees it out for him. This is the worst story so far. Right, Toto? Thank you for watching. Please be sure to be nice to each other in the comments. Consider supporting the creators you admire, like with my merchandise you can buy. Kind of looked like Toto dabbed when he did that. Hold on. Can you dab? No. Yeah, no, he can kind of dab. Yeah, go hard, Toto. You're doing it. Buy my merchandise on my fourth wall store, and never lose sight of the things that are important to you. Remember that Freddy stands for friendly, respectful engagement, discussion, and discourse yields success. Unfortunately, I'm not able to update my patron slide for May as I am traveling, so I would like to continue to thank my April patrons. Brandon, Lady Lilac, Lauren V, Morgan, Nan, Scott, Sophie, and Suka, as well as Billy, Klaus, Cami Khan, Eliza, Halmar, Johnny the Night Guard, Kira, Lauren R, Rhiannon, Rose, Sebhar, Thamagata, World's Greatest Bard, Ya Boy Peachy, and Zany Face, as well as Emily, HHD, Jinx, Jose, Mustard Shirt Guy, Rolo, and Riley, as well as Jeannie and Ray. Oh, we will see you next time.
Amen to Him power and trust. I dance trust Him with light to me better. What if I give Him what He wants? He have to tell me everything.